do so. So just wanted to say hello and welcome to everybody. So as you know, we normally have a monthly workshop, and I was talking to Bonnie a little over a month ago now. She was like, wouldn't it be so cool if we had these workshops where we interviewed people that had successful brigade practices and we talked to them about it? And so I asked Bonnie if she'd be willing to host the workshop today, and she thankfully said yes. So thank you so much, Bonnie, for hosting today, and Michelle for joining us as a subject matter expert. We'd like to get started, so I'm going to lay low unless anybody has any specific questions for me, and let Bonnie take things from here.
Okay, can you turn on the screen sharing so I can share the slide deck?
Sure, just 1 second. Okay, try that now, Bonnie, and see if it works.
Okay, 1 second. Cool. 1 second. Let me get this. I don't want to lose control of my notes. Okay, can everybody see the slide deck?
Yep.
Okay, fantastic. And then I want to be able to see the chat. Let me get that up. Okay, perfect. That way if people have questions while we're going through the beginning part. Okay, so I'm Bonnie from Hack for LA, and as Veronica said, I really enjoy talking to other brigade members from around the country at both Summit and Congress, and then beyond, to find out what they're doing well that we can export for our brigade, and vice versa, things that we're doing well that they can export. And sometimes it's just a different way of doing the same thing, and we can inform each other. So I thought this was a great idea for a series, and fortunately Veronica's allowed us to use this platform to launch the first of what I hope will be many of these. So Michelle and I started talking about this process that she was doing at her brigade, and so together we made this slide deck. Michelle, please introduce yourself and something.
All right, my name is Michelle. I'm from Code for Boston. The project we're working on, where we're implementing this, is a project called Clean Slate, based on criminal record expungement, and it was part of our project management process. A woman named Dawn Graham came from another group who had adopted this practice, and we took it on and adapted it to our needs, and so far it's been actually incredibly helpful. Though, I think I'm curious to see how the experiment will continue as time goes on and as our group changes. Should I go straight into it?
I think that I just lost the share while trying to get the Slack up. Hold on 1 second. Yeah, sorry about this. I'm hitting resume share, and it says bring your shared window to the front.
So consensus-based decision-making, well, I think it works. This is not on the slides. I figured I'd chat while we were waiting.
I'm sharing it. Sorry.
Sure.
Go ahead, keep talking.
Okay. So I think part of the challenge for brigade projects is that there are new members coming and going all the time, and old members going, right? So you can't have all the decision-making resting on one person or a set of individuals that may have to go and live life somewhere else for a while. So people need to feel responsibility for the decision-making process, and need to be able to make decisions when certain individuals aren't there, which is a big part of why we chose consensus. There are other, oh, I see the slides.
Are they in slide view mode now?
I think so.
Okay, great. Okay, sorry about that. Thank you. Okay, great. Thanks for that overview. So what we're going to do is we're going to run through this deck, and I'm going to ask some questions, and then we're going to actually practice this on the call And
Actually, we do see, I can see your mouse, just FYI.
okay, but the deck is, are you seeing
No, not the editing
I will
interface.
move my mouse. Okay, great. Next. Okay, so, but I have to, okay, there we go. So are you seeing the second slide now?
Yep.
Okay, great. So what you need for this workshop is just yourself and required engagement. Yeah. So go ahead.
That was,
You take
yeah.
it.
I made those slides. I can't, you know, yeah, go to the next slide.
Okay.
So I can't
yeah.
get that part to happen. All right, so why fist of 5 consensus voting? I think I didn't explain what consensus decision making is. It's where everyone agrees to one course of action. It doesn't mean necessarily that everyone loves that course of action, but everyone agrees to it. So why fist of 5? It's to make sure that everyone, it says to make sure you're on the same page with the minimum amount of conflict, but for other reasons again, as well. So it's also to make sure that people who I wasn't quite done with the previous slide.
Intentionally, I moved my mouse.
Okay.
Oh my God.
So it's to make sure that people who don't get heard, who don't speak up and don't usually voice their opinions or status, that we get to hear from them as well. It's to be able to articulate details about a choice or change that you want to make. It can be to get the temperature of a room. And it also, this particular model comes with vocabulary that I think is useful to communicating differences in opinion about a choice that's brought up or an idea. All right, I'm ready for the next slide.
Okay, I will try to make it go to the next slide. There we go.
All right, great. So what this looks like, great. There are 3 basic parts. The first part is the proposal, the second part is voting, and the third part is documented discussion. And the fourth part, which I didn't mention before, is repeating the last 2 until you get to a place of consensus. Next. All right, so proposal is exactly what it sounds like. It's just an idea for a change. It's an idea you have, you bring it up, right? You go ahead to the next slide. There's no reason to go into that one in detail. So the voting is the part that I find is really well put together. It involves anywhere between a 5 and a fist, right? So all the way down. To you either vote with your, a strong consensus, which is 5 fingers, and you have to read the fine print, because this doesn't mean what you think it means. 5 fingers means you not only support the proposal, but you're willing to be one of the leaders. So you're going to take personal responsibility about implementing the solution and leading the solution. A 4 says you support the proposal and you will help implement it, even if you won't be a leader. 3 says, okay, I'm not sure I totally agree, but I'm willing to go along with it. We don't need to discuss it anymore. A 2 is, I have a couple minor issues with it. A 1 is, I definitely need to discuss certain issues, and I think I need to suggest changes. A fist is, we can't move forward. I have a fundamental disagreement with this proposal. And if we're going to adopt this proposal, I can't move forward. It usually still is a place of discussion, though. It should be. If you're working with a group that has buy-in, and that really is necessary for consensus-based decision-making. The last one is abstaining, standing aside. I'm not going to help implement it, but I'm not going to stop the group. It might be because you disagree with the proposal fundamentally, but don't want to get in the way, or because you just don't have time or energy, or it's not relevant to you and and what you're doing right now. You're like, y'all do your thing. All right, next slide. So, voting first. So why voting instead of discussion first? Well, first of all, that may be all you need. Maybe everyone is on board. They're like, great decision, move on. And so why do you, and the other part of it is gives you a foundation for the discussion. So you understand where everybody is at. You have what I say here is concrete and explicit understanding of where everyone is at. You can also use it because the discussion has lost focus and someone goes, okay, fist to 5, and we get back on track. It's helped us in the past. Next slide. And the third part is documented discussion. A vote a vote below 3 should start a discussion. I mean, other than abstaining, a 2 or a 1 should start a discussion about what concerns are, or a fist should start a discussion about what concerns are, and that discussion should be documented, because this process is for people who are also not present during the meeting. I mean, you know, we should all have meeting notes anyway, but these, especially when you're making decisions that affect the group, should be something that is documented. And I'll get back to this, it could be in your meeting notes or it could be an official part of the documentation that I'll talk about in a bit. And you document ideas, concerns, decisions you make for changes to the proposal, and so on and so forth. All right. An example. Okay, so let's try something. First, we're going to show you what an informal proposal looks like.
Okay, can I ask you a question now? Because I think I just read this slide and it says, call out fist to 5 and just take a vote. Who's calling out the fist to 5, and is that not awkward? Seriously.
Well, it depends how much social anxiety you have, which is totally valid. You know, some people I think would not be comfortable with calling out fist to 5, but I think for those who are, it's just anytime you feel as it says, when you need to get a fast, small decision out of the way. Like for my group, we were like, do we need new members this week? I proposed we get no new members this week. We did a fist to 5.
But who calls out fist to 5? I mean, who's
anyone. Okay. Anyone who feels there's a vote. Ideally, you have a facilitator for the meeting, right? We have someone who is leading the meeting, keeping things, the workflow going. And it's really, it's their job to keep an eye out for when fist to 5 would be appropriate. But you can call fist to 5 when you want a fist to 5. It's not.
So if someone's just talking and it sounds like they've made a proposal, and instead of just kind of having this endless discussion, a person who's listening could say, hey, I think this is perfect for a fist to 5 vote.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. You don't use it to interrupt someone, I hope, right? That's kind of a group norm you have to establish, that you don't talk over people or ignore their input. And that needs to be like a basic foundation of your group. But yes, if you feel, you know what, I think we've gotten off. I mean, you can also say, I think we've gotten off track. What if, what a fist to 5? A fist to 5 is just a really good way of grounding yourself.
Yeah.
And, or that's what we've found. Like, those are grounding yourself and understanding where people are at in, like I said, in a very concrete and like quantifiable way. And I think quantified in ways that are really informative.
Okay, well, can I try one?
Sure.
Okay, so I propose that we have a fundraiser holiday party.
Oh, okay. Well, all right, let's try a vote. Fist to 5 it.
Okay, well, I'm all 5, obviously.
All right.
Oh, you're a 2. Okay.
I'm a 2 because I actually have some concerns about, I would say that this would be more of a formal proposal as opposed to an informal proposal.
Oh, you have questions?
Because, yeah, I have questions and concerns, and I want it outlined. I want to understand how the fundraising is going to happen.
Okay, can you give us an example of an informal proposal that is good?
Sure, Bonnie. How about we include the logo on the team development page? Okay. I think that'd be a good idea. Keep it brand. I'll lead that because I can implement that. What's fist to 5? What's yours?
I think it's this one. I'm abstaining because I don't know what the page is. I don't care.
Perfect.
So, right, is that right? Let's see. Oh yeah, okay. So stand aside, abstain, which is like we're handshaking.
Yep.
Okay. Good. Oh, wait. How did that happen?
We
There we go.
didn't take notes. We should have taken notes, but that's all right. We planned a whole meeting note page, but
Okay,
I
so
can
now
say
we're on
we
the meeting notes page. So how does the note, looks like we kind of have some pre-formatted notes. Are you going to make some new ones and show us what the notes looks like?
So I'm writing them in, but I don't know if they're going to show up on yours as it's live. So I don't think it is. You might have to.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I've never
So
didn't show up.
I've set up the skeleton, but I would have put, vote, 5-2. There was a proposal made. It goes from bottom to top. So the recent is on top is the way we found it to be most useful.
Okay, so there it's updated. I updated
There
it.
we go. 5-2, more detailed proposal needed, requested.
Okay.
Or, and our vote was 5 and abstain. For the, it was the other way around.
Yeah, I think so. Let me back up. You're going to
This
update.
did go to plan.
Meh.
You plan your life so carefully. There we go.
Okay,
I cleaned it up.
there we go. Back to present. Okay, perfect.
So since I want a more detailed, a formal proposal, as it were, let's go to the next slide, which I have prepared for us. Formal proposals. So a formal proposal is a structured written proposal, and it's been modified from the steps in efficient consensus decision-making section of emergent strategy. And we have it on the resource slide along with a couple other resources that are relevant. And we'll have an example document for you later that actually shows the structure, but I'll go over it, a couple things, really quickly. So you use a formal proposal when a temperature check shows that the issue is more complex than you thought. So as we found with the holiday fundraising party, I thought that maybe that was a very cavalier way of suggesting a very complex process. You might use it when you want a vote that is going to continue through the week. So you have absentee members, teammates, who you want to get a chance to see, what the discussion was, what the proposal was, read up on it and get a chance to vote. And or if you need deeper documentation and discussion about the issue so people can refer back to it later, or if it's something that is so fundamental to the project that it needs to be recorded as a kind of root level document or a foundational document. And you can do anywhere from, between an informal and formal proposal as I've set them out here. You can do something in Slack that goes, it's the middle of the week. I've thought of this thing. Here is my proposal. There's a whole format for writing a Slack. We have a format, a really, kind of fill in the blank thing for writing a proposal on Slack, and you can slap it in there and go, all right, everybody vote on it. And it, you don't need a written proposal for that either. So there's multiple levels on which you do it, and it's important you do it on the appropriate level.
Well,
Do we want new members? You don't want a written proposal for that.
So this sounds good. Can we try it?
Yes. Sorry, talk forever. Can we try it?
Oh, this is that example you were telling us from when Boston did it.
Right. This file is actually a formal proposal for using FIST to 5 as your decision-making process.
Okay.
It's very meta, and it does a good job giving you a skeleton, a structure for how to write your own formal proposal.
Or
and
people,
what?
I'm sorry, Michelle. So people could just use this to, like they could actually copy that proposal and take it to their brigade and say, hey, I propose we do FIST to 5 and here's my formal proposal. They could just customize it for their own brigade.
Yeah.
Great.
You got the little recycle logo.
Okay.
Oh, you can't see my face, but yeah, recycle with love.
Okay.
But yeah, you probably want to remove the Code for Boston logo.
Okay. Well, let's go to the next one then.
All right. So this is this is something you and I prepared, Bonnie. we instead of proposing a 5 voting system, which wouldn't work quite so well for a Zoom series, you wanted to write up a proposal, or you wanted to create a proposal.
And I propose that we basically turn this over to audience questions now instead of me asking more questions or making comments. So since that's a formal proposal and there's a voting structure, Michelle, will you paste this into the Brigade channel?
Sure. The Brigade channel or the Zoom series channel? Because I think it might be more useful in the
Okay.
channel.
Yeah, please paste it into the Brigade Successful Practices channel.
5 on what channel to paste this into?
Yeah. Oh, the channel that's listed on the slide. Yes. Okay. Good.
Good.
Yeah.
Cool. All right.
I'm actually going to bring up Slack so that we can all see that instead of everybody going to their own Slack. I mean, you all have to go to your own Slack in order to vote, but
Yeah.
No,
There we go.
so,
All right.
Where is it? Here we go. So now this is.
You should be pasting this. Actually, it's your proposal, but
yeah, it's
all right. It can. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm gonna have to stop share and then resume share so you guys can see my Slack. There's no other way.
So we've set this up. If you all are in the channel, you can look in the channel. We've set up our Slack. You can add custom emojis to Slack, and we've added these as custom emojis to Slack. So if you react to it and click, colon and type in CONSE, the various consensus options will show up, and you can either, support it and be one of the leaders, which I think might mean that you have a question to ask, perhaps. Does that sound right, Bonnie?
Yeah, I think 5 is you have questions and then I could call on you. And all of the other things are like, okay, well, the number 4 is like, I support it and I'll help implement it by thinking of questions. And 3 would be, I'm in agreement. We don't need to talk about whether or not we're going to ask questions or not. And other people would be like, yeah, I really want Bonnie to ask questions, which would be the, or I have questions about how we're going to ask questions. Maybe.
Yeah, well, I'd like to point out that 3 is not in total agreement, which we have a 3. And I will say that a lot of times when someone brings up a 3, we set aside a bit of time to find out what the concern is, just to make sure that it's not a deeper concern.
Okay, well, can we do this? Like, can everybody just vote? Are you guys ready to start asking questions and have me turn this over to moderating the questions that you're going to ask Michelle? Please vote in the channel, the Slack channel, if you're online. What happens if nobody votes?
Well, there's already people that have voted, so it's too late.
Nobody's voted.
Yeah, 5 at the bottom right there. 5 people have used 4 fingers.
Oh, I see. Oh, okay, got it. Oh, I was missing that. I was like thinking it was going to be lower than that, but you're right. It's right on there. It's the reaction. See,
yep.
Awesome. I'm learning something because we haven't actually practiced this.
That's
okay,
true.
so far it's like 6. And is that the?
People are really into it, but nobody has questions they need to ask.
Interesting.
This is all right.
Yeah.
If nobody has questions they need to ask, I would question whether this is we've got one question.
Yeah, who's got a question? I'm going to mouse over this. Looks like David Hayes has a question.
Yeah, I can just jump on.
Yeah.
Part of my question on this whole thing is, how are you presenting it when this happens? Like, is it that in every new member night you're reviewing this process, and every time you have a discussion in that context, you're encouraging people to use it? Or is it a less formal thing where it's only in some meetings some of the time? And how do you handle that?
So that's a really good question. And when you're onboarding people during every meeting, that's a tough thing to deal with. I mean, the onboarding process is generally a tough thing to deal with every week. So we don't bring it up every week, and we have this in the root of our Google folder, which we're using for the overall project documentation that we have branches in GitHub and so on and so forth. And so when people come in, one of the first things we say is, great to have you. We're interested in finding out where you can fit, first read these documents in the Google Drive so you can catch up with the group. And usually, most times, first-time members aren't able to contribute to the progress of the project anyway. We're at a point in the project where you need some background information before you can dive in. So this is part of their background information, and usually people don't read it quite carefully enough to get what 5 means. So people will, 5 when they mean a 4. But as a project manager, you're kind of aware who's new. And then if an explanation is needed, we won't do it every time. If an explanation is needed every other time or every third time, but usually it's when there's a moment to take people aside so that it doesn't disrupt the rest of the group. Does that make sense? Though we're still trying to work out what the best way is to get people onboarded to the process, I will say. Does that make sense?
That's certainly helpful to know that you aren't clear on the best procedure, because it feels to me like the other thing I was going to mention is group size. It feels to me like doing this in a 2-person conversation is maybe possible, but a little silly, but also in a 10-person conversation, it seems super useful. So
yeah, the group size definitely matters. And some of the resources we have talk about consensus. I'm not sure they talk about a group of 2 people. One of the important things I find about Fist of 5 is using it the right way at the right times. If it's 2 people, unless you have, some people have trouble communicating, and so having some kind of formal structure around that, you'd be surprised how much that would help. But usually 2 people, no, you're both speaking, I would hope. And we hope that you're on the same page. But yeah, if you get to like 5 people, I'd say 4 or 5 and above, depending on who the people are. If you've got someone that's a really quiet person, then 3 people, you might want to do a Fist of 5.
Perfect. So Wes has a question. Wes, do you want to say it out loud, or do you want me to read it?
Oh, sure, I can say it out loud. I was wondering about the logistics when you're in a remote session. And then my question was partly answered by this use of Slack that we just went through. But have you had any experience trying to do it in a situation where people are only on the phone? Because or with their video turned off, I guess our Slack was kind of our backup. But how do you do it with people who are just dialed in?
Well, on the phone, we haven't tried a lot of this on the phone. If it's just by voice, I've never been in a situation yet where I've needed a Fist of 5 vote and people have been on just by voice. They've usually been able to respond through Slack as well. So putting the proposal on Slack is what helps with that. I think you could just verbally, if it were me listening, I would have to make a note of it. But because I wouldn't be able to keep track of that. But I think people can check in verbally as well. Conference call, though, if it's only by voice, the chaos of that is, I don't know how many times you've experienced that. We do that for birthday calls for my family, and we've got a lot of families. So, you take turns by age. I guess you decide on a turn order. Good question.
Yeah, and the experience I've had that was related was on a software team where we were throwing points for user stories, and we would have some people in the room and some people working remotely, and I think what we ended up doing, we used a combination of instant message and then if we didn't see something, we'd actually ask people out loud. But there was sort of somebody quarterbacking it and organizing like who was in the room on the call.
Yeah, I think
going through the names.
Yeah, I think that's especially useful if you don't have visual contact with people. Having a designated individual to keep track of what feedback has been received and to count up and make sure all the votes have come in.
Yeah,
I highly recommend that everyone cast a vote, even if someone is abstaining, so that you've heard from everybody and that everybody's paying attention.
So I think Amio has a either question or maybe
A concern.
even concern that we shouldn't have proceeded with this. Some people, it took them a while to join the channel. So let's hear from them.
Yeah, Amio, bring up your concern.
Sure, thank you very much. So just a question around logistics, right? So if it's a meaty proposal and you have a large group, so voting and discussions could go on for quite some time. So do you typically time box this exercise that, you know, all votes till 11:30 will be counted, and then after that, don't really care? So that's the first part of the question. And the second question is also on logistics. Does the counter at and this is very relevant for larger groups, you know, does it, suppose I vote twice. First time I say, I have questions, and then I have an offline chat and my questions are answered, and I vote again. Does the counter adjust itself?
Yes. So let me answer the second one first, because that's pretty easy. You have repeated voting. So you vote once at the beginning, and then if discussion is needed, you discuss, and then you have another vote until you've got 3 and above or abstaining. So no 2s and 1s, because that's how you can move forward. Repeated voting is a part of the process for us, at least. I don't know if it's meant to be part of the process. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it is. I don't know how it would work otherwise. So yes, it is recounted, it is revoted, but at an official time. Like when someone says, let's take another vote, that's when you do it. You don't change it in the middle. Otherwise it gets confusing where people's status is at. And that's a big part of why you do this. As far as, is anyone documenting these questions?
Michelle, I am. I'm putting them actually in the channel. If somebody didn't ask them themselves, then I'm putting them in the channel. So your answer was yes, we can vote. What was the answer for the time boxing?
Time boxing. So time boxing, so far we have not had to close down a discussion based on time. And I'd suggest that if that is a norm you want to establish, then put that in your 5 proposal document so that people can discuss it and you can decide whether that is a good fit for your group. I think it all depends on what's a good fit for your group. For me personally, having a time limit doesn't work. I mean, if people have serious concerns and, you know, we've reached the time limit and this proposal is important, like it depends on the proposal. It depends on, you know, how concerned people are. Like if this is a proposal that something needs to be done about the issue, then you've got to come to some point of consensus. So it probably depends what the issue is as to whether it would be practical to time box it. I think this has to be used not in isolation. It has to be used as part of a culture that you've built up and part of group practices. So if you say, okay, I just want to, like, we're stuck deep in this discussion, let's change it up, let's do a pros and cons list, let's find a different way out of this rut. If you find your way out of in a rut, you need to be able to identify your inner rut and use some other techniques to get out of it. If 5 isn't working for you.
Okay.
Does that make sense? You know what? And take it with a grain of salt, because I haven't run into that yet. And if you do run into that, you should report back to us, because I'd be interested in finding out.
It looks like Gary has a question. How many, you want, Gary, are you on? Okay, I'll read Gary's question for him. How many concurrent issues do you 5 with before they become projects?
How many issues do you 5 with before they become projects, or do you mean before they become written proposals?
Yeah, basically it's, we get together as a core group and we try to figure out the things we want to do. And you could do 5s and look at the votes and then let people think about them. But how many concurrently do you let sit out there before they really become before they get momentum to do stuff.
So this is for a project at Code for Boston. This isn't a core team exercise that they do.
Right.
So we're not deciding on what projects Code for Boston is going to accept versus not. What we have for a bigger proposal, for example, is first of all, a time limit for voting online. So you have to vote, everyone who's voting has to vote by next week's meeting online, and then we will discuss it in group. I think that if everyone's above, above a 2, 3 and up, then for accepting a proposal for a new project, I think you're golden. If something, if a lot of people have concerns about something, then maybe that is not something to move forward with. And if it's in the middle, I think setting yourself a time limit for how long you let it go around the drain, and maybe this speaks to Gary, right? If it's something where, like,
yeah, exactly. You got to get people on board, and some of them, they don't really kind of see it as something we should do, but eventually they're like, they come home and they come back and they're like, oh my God, yeah, this fits. So
yeah. And I think you can repropose as long as you have good group, norms and practices. I think reproposing, I think an important, the questions I'm hearing, I think a lot is really important to take, is that it depends on the proposal and it depends on the group, because some proposals are going to be completely different than others. But yeah.
But I appreciate what you said in your introduction, that everyone isn't at every meeting.
Yep.
And that with our brigade, it happened all the time.
Yeah.
So you kind of have to, and
you have to use the resources at hand. Yeah.
Yeah, but you kind of have to move along and keep it going, and new people show up at meetups and stuff. So I think this is great, but I just, like, how many moving parts can you keep going at the same time is basically my question.
Yeah, I think that, again, yeah, it depends on the group, and it depends. You can also break it up into subcommittees, if you're like, and not one person writes all the proposals. Like, a person who wants to put forward a proposal writes up a proposal, and then it's part of the document. Or that's what we've done, because that's the person who knows the details of what they're proposing. So it doesn't make sense otherwise.
So Michelle,
yes.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry.
So I want to ask a question about the 5 hand. So sometimes if I'm proposing something, it's because I'm willing to lead it, but sometimes I'm proposing it because I think we should do it as a brigade. And I can see using this in our leadership calls, where there's quite a few people on the calls, but where I'm asking someone else to stand up and be a leader. Have you found that to be effective?
So yeah, I've proposed stuff that I don't want to be a leader for. I'm actually very bad at focusing and making sure that things are getting done and things are being paid attention to, as you and I have discussed several times. Usually, and it doesn't count. It's not for everything, but there are a couple times where I've been like, I think this would be a really good idea. Like, if everybody votes a 4, then this can't go through, right? Because there's no one to take leadership over it. There's no one owning it. But if someone else is willing to vote with a 5, and take ownership of it, then it'll be something that happens. So I guess that's a situation in which even all 4s, a proposal will not go through.
Because no one will lead it. Got it.
If no one is going to lead it and take ownership for it, if it needs ownership, right? You need all the ingredients. So, there are some things that, I guess there might be some things out there that don't need to be led or owned, but I can't think of one. So, but yeah, it's completely appropriate in my opinion. If you decide as a group that it's not appropriate, you can put it in your, proposal for a fist to 5. You can say you can't propose anything that you're not willing to lead. That would hamper a lot of my proposals, though.
Does anybody who's not asked a question yet have a question? No? Okay, I have another question, and that is, so I want to use the example of the holiday party that I never turned into a formal proposal.
Sure.
So what if basically every time somebody proposes something, everybody just says, oh, that's a formal proposal. I have more questions and more discussion is needed and we can't make a decision together. And then that just becomes a way to basically block things from happening.
Mm-hmm.
By forcing the person who's making decent suggestions, not that I'm saying that's me, I'm just saying, are they getting constantly forced into writing proposals as a way of silencing them?
So, and this might sound like a cop-out, but I mean it so sincerely, and I definitely don't mean it as an insult, but if someone is being silenced in a group, that is a problem with group norms. In my experience, there is a problem with the group dynamics and the group's understanding of how to interact that no structure is going to solve. Because whatever structure you use, that person will still be stuck being silenced. So this is not a panacea. This is, there has to be everybody has to be coming at it honestly and agree that they can, and be self-aware enough to know that they can come at it honestly, and that they can, just so you know, we can still see your Slack.
Yeah, that's why I posted.
Okay, good. So that everyone is on board with the process and on board to respect the process, to not abuse the process. And that is a group norm, unfortunately. Yeah.
Again, I'm going to ask, has anybody not already asked a question have a question? See you, Chris. I see your picture just showed up. Anybody have a question that has not already asked a question? And if the answer to that is no, then anybody who has asked a question, who wants to ask a follow-up question or another question.
And if you have a question, if you put up a 5 as a response just by itself in the Slack, or a note here, I think we would accept. If you don't get a chance to speak out loud before I butt in with another comment.
Yeah.
A good question, Bonnie.
David Hayes is typing something on Slack, which we just don't know what. It's very,
Yeah, I mean, I can just jump in. I'm just kind of wondering if we can process through some examples. Maybe, Michelle, you've got them. Maybe we need to come up with them and talk about sort of the trade-offs of using Fist to 5 in it versus not. Like, the thing that's most on my mind, and this is kind of Gary's question, is like, would you ever think to use Fist to 5 about whether or not you adopt a project? Is that like the wrong format to ask that question?
I probably would if it were up to me. I'm not on the core team, so I'm not gonna decide for them. But I think that would be a very appropriate and a very useful way to gauge people's, again, that would be a place where if I made a proposal for a project to be adopted and everyone voted for, right? That would tell me something really important. That would tell me no one wants to take ownership over this project, and that would tell me that this is not a good project for the group.
I agree. Ownership on a core team is a big thing.
Yeah.
And with this process, you would have someone for it to go forward, someone would need to be the owner.
Exactly. So I think the part of the thing that I've enjoyed about this process is that it can be on so many levels of informal to formal. Like you can say, does everybody, I propose we all get coffee afterwards, Fist to 5, and then you just get the decision done and you move along. And it can be on the level of, you know, does the brigade look for new funding with this particular source? You know, and that's going to be a deeper discussion. If you want, we can look at the proposal document. I don't know if that would be possible. Example document. Do you want to come up with a few? I'm not sure what would be useful to you specifically, David. So
yeah, I'm just trying to, part of the second half of my question is just like, I think there are almost certainly, and I highlighted the too small a group earlier, but there are times when this is obviously probably not the right way to proceed. And I'm curious just to hear your thoughts about what that is as someone who's done it way more than I have. Is it that the proposal is too immature and undefined?
I would say no. I would say that's a great time to take an informal fist to five to discover if people have concerns that it's too immature, right? Like if someone thinks they have a full proposal and they present it to the group and the group says, okay, I've got it twos and ones because I think this isn't ready, or this needs a more formal description. I think it's useful there too. I do think you should use your judgment. Fist to five doesn't have to be everything. It's not the whole solution. If you find a situation, and also if you find specific situations where fist to five is not useful, please let me know. I'll add it to the documentation because I think that is very interesting. That would be very interesting to find out. I think there are ways in which it can be misused. For example, I am concerned that it can turn small discussions into long discussions. Like discussions that might otherwise be short, you might get into details too much and, you know, kind of, you know, bike shed it, right? That's the expression, where you takes really long on a really mundane decision that doesn't really need that kind of discussion. And I think that is still about who you've got for leadership during the meeting. Got kind of how you've established the format for these conversations. I think like there are more complicated things in the dynamics, but if you find that it is impeding your progress, one, tell it to me because I'd like to know because I find this very interesting. And two, definitely don't use it in those cases. Is there another example that you can think of, David, where this might be obstructive as opposed to constructive?
Nothing immediately comes to mind. I do actually want to try to clarify something you just said, though, which is, I think bike shedding is classically like too small a problem, talked about for too long.
There you go. Much better articulation. Thank you.
So you're thinking that this could actually lead to that outcome if you tried to build consensus about a very small problem that doesn't matter? Is that what you're saying?
So I think the consensus-based decision-making can be slower, period. I mean, it's slower, period, because one person isn't making the decisions. So that's going to be slower. I think that it can, if a group has a tendency towards bike shedding, then I think consensus-based voting is going to exacerbate that.
That makes a lot of sense.
Of the consensus-based voting systems that I've experienced, fist to five seems to do a decent job with curbing that the way we use it, which is frequent check-ins that ground us back in to where we are and what our next steps need to be. So it's partly, I think, in how you use the voting system, whatever system you're using, honestly. And if fist to five is not enough to ground you, there are other things you can do, like making a pros and cons list to make things more concrete. Hey,
Michelle?
Yes.
It is 4:55.
Oh,
it's
Gosh.
time for us
Sorry.
to move on to the next part, which is
Yes.
the follow-up vote.
Right.
Can you paste that into the channel? And I edited it so it reflected how we voted, which was basically we voted to go to questions at that point.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very good.
So
I
the
will.
follow-up vote is we decided on this host to audience question ratio instead of like a lot of talking for 45 minutes and then you guys only get like 15 minutes to answer questions. For the series that I'm producing, I would like to propose that we continue this. So there's less talking of the guests at the top and guests and hosts at the top and more time for questions about exactly how you would implement things and stuff like that. So yeah, Michelle, you'll post that in the Slack channel.
Done and done.
Wonderful.
This is actually maybe a good example, David. I've thought of two now. Here, the 5, I support the proposal and am willing to be one of the leaders. I'm pretty sure Bonnie is the only one that can do a 5 for that, right? So is this, do we need to make a different range of options?
No,
maybe this is appropriate enough.
Wait a second. 5 would mean that you are willing to be a guest.
Oh,
To basically provide leadership to other brigades. So
maybe I should edit that. Maybe I should edit that in here.
Okay.
But another thing, when Bonnie and I were discussing this episode, I don't know, and a guest. There we go. So we were talking about how we could have a vote on using a fist to 5 process for this Zoom series. And basically the conclusion was that would not make sense because how are the audience members, first of all, the audience members would all have to be onboarded every single time, which we'd just have to repeat this webinar. I mean, this episode over again. And secondly, the decisions about the process, about many of the processes for the series need to happen between Bonnie and a guest, and so it's not appropriate to have, is it appropriate to create that kind of group norm when a lot of the decisions aren't going to be done through that kind of process? I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. I was there. That makes sense.
Right, but does that make sense as a downside to fist to 5 voting, or just I
think what you highlighted just now, if I could summarize, is that fist to 5 is great if you actually want people's opinions. So you should only propose things that you're actually in a group setting that you're willing to have people vote on. If you're not, don't use this method. It will backfire.
Yeah.
Well, I want to turn this back over to Veronica because we've just been guests on her CFA series. So if you're Veronica, you're around, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. This slide deck is available in the channel, and we will update one of the slides that has the notes about what the questions were that were asked and what the answers were.
There's also a slide that has the images for the hands if you want to put it on your message board, and a link about how to add them to a Slack channel if Slack is the messaging system you're using.
Yeah, the whole slide deck is a how-to.
Yeah.
Veronica, you around?
Yep, I'm right here. This has been great. Thank you, Bonnie. Thank you, Michelle. And thank you everyone for participating. This sparked a lot of conversation, which I think is always a great sign that we'll be able to use this back in our brigades and for this process moving forward. So thank you very much. So next steps for this are we will post, we always have a discourse blurb about each workshop. So we'll post the video to this as well as this slide deck, Bonnie, if that works. Yep. So you can reference this and then have further discussion on the channel, I guess, Bonnie, about what folks would like to see in the future. So If anyone has any further questions, let myself or Bonnie know, or any questions for Michelle.
Yeah, feel free to message on the channel or, you know, whenever.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. I hope everyone has a great evening, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks, Veronica.
Thanks, Veronica.
Bye, Michelle.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everybody.